my party, we're just getting started. A life is a dream or a nightmare scarring. Hand me a drink cause I think I'm going all in. Get me a shrink who can catch me when I'm falling. Cover up my scars, flip the handlebars, crashing in my car, wake up in a bar. I'll be a superstar, just on my avatar. This world is so bizarre, empty out the reservoir. Yeah, I'm taking 6 shots, yeah, straight to the face. And I wanna get lost, I'm sick of this place. Don't know how to stop when I'm feeling this way. So I'm taking 6 shots till I'm feeling okay. I think I'm going crazy, don't think I'll get home safe. So I'm taking 6 shots, all straight to the face. I'm taking 6 shots, are you coming with me? I'm taking 6 shots, yeah, straight to the face. And I wanna get lost, I'm sick of this place. Don't know how to stop when I'm feeling this way. So I'm taking 6 shots till I'm feeling okay. I think I'm going crazy, don't think I'll get home safe. So I'm taking 6 shots, all straight to the face. I'm taking 6 shots, are you coming with me? Sometimes you need to let loose, grab juice, get goose, tattoos, taboos, get screwed. Loosen up, buttercup, all those hate comments will never make you feel enough. We're all adequate graduates, heart full of calluses, but we know calculus. Damn, ain't that fabulous? Can't wait to apply all those mathematicus. But we can't get a job that pays us enough. I'm about to pop up. Fuck you, you're lost. We all know that we never really want a boss. So I'ma do what I want to, something I can't undo. Yeah, I'ma do what I want to, something I can't undo. I'm taking 6 shots, yeah, straight to the face. And I wanna get
enjoy it. In truth, the game had barely come together in time, and its multiplayer mode had been crammed in last minute. It was pretty ambitious and had fallen short of both the market and Guerrilla's expectations. But that didn't stop the Guerrillas from setting even loftier ambitions. The team learned from the mistakes of the first game by employing dedicated game designers and installing game directors to help keep the new project on track. Executive producer Angie Smets remembers that time well.
So we shipped Killzone 1 and we knew that we had a lot to improve just on our development process. For a while we worked on an internal vision video about what a first-person shooter game could look like for the next generation. And it was meant for internal use only, to be like, you know, a visionary piece. Because when we started, it was going to be a Killzone. Yeah, Killzone 2 was originally a PlayStation 2 game.
If this visionary piece is starting to sound familiar, it's because you've probably watched it. What was meant to be a target video for the team to aim towards somehow made it onto Sony's stage at E3 2005.
When we were in the planning stages for this event, we asked many of our development partners, including several teams within our own internal studios, to submit content to be shown today. We expected to see a few bright lights and a couple of diamonds in the rough, as it is early in the development process. Our partners have prepared a glimpse into this future to share with you today. So let's take a look at what fans have to look forward to.
Near the end of the press conference, Kaz Hirai introduced a demo reel of existing franchises that would see games on the upcoming PlayStation 3. And it was there, right after what we now know was the first tease of Red Dead Redemption, that we caught our first glimpse of the second Killzone.
Which we thought was very cool. You know, we worked really hard on this visionary piece, our vision for the future of gaming. And then somebody from, I believe it was the marketing group in the States said, yeah, and this is running real time on a PlayStation 3. And we were watching this back home going like, no, what does he just say? Because, you know, that's not true. But then we figured like, yeah, you know, nobody will believe that because it's obvious that it's all rendered. And then we went online and lots of people actually did believe it. And then we were like, oh, this is not good. Because in reality, I think the first kit had just arrived for R&D purposes. Okay. I'm not sure if we had the first triangle rendering then already, or maybe that even took like 2 more months before we were up to that point. Mm. But the sheer enthusiasm that came out of us showing the trailer did, I think, play a big role in us then being asked to make it a PlayStation 3 title.
Right.
And that's also when we realized we really had to scale up the team, because the PlayStation 3 compared to the PlayStation 2 was so much more powerful. We could show so much more detail.
What Killzone 1 was, it did well. It gave us a reputation for technology, for art. But then in terms of gameplay, that very visceral combat experience, that was Killzone 2.
Killzone 2 was a huge success for the studio and cemented Guerrilla as one of Sony's most important first-party studios. Over the next few years, the team would continue to work on the franchise, utilizing whatever new technology Sony had come up with. Killzone Liberation was a flagship title for Sony's first handheld, the PSP. Killzone 3 came out for the PlayStation 3 in 2011, supporting both PlayStation Move and 3D technology. And Killzone Mercenary was released for the PlayStation Vita in 2013. But after a decade of working on dark, dystopian futures, the team recognized that they couldn't do space Nazis forever.
If people work on something for too long, there is this notion of fatigue, creative fatigue, and they can no longer do their best work. Doesn't mean that we'll never do anything in the Killzone series, because we really love that franchise, we love the universe that we created, but it's just healthy for people to do something else. So we were already, I guess, back in the Killzone 3 days, that was our 5th Killzone game. We were open to exploring something new.
So it's 2010, around March or April. We've got about 9 months left on Killzone 3. And so we were thinking like, okay, well, this is the third one. Are we going to continue with this? It was, of course, these questions like Killzone was successful, but never sort of, big successful.
Right.
Is this really what we want to be doing for another 10 years? Is this the best way that we can spend all the time and effort and talent of the team?
Then there was, I guess, also the idea that people were interested in something else. There was a craving for, I guess, a very positive, very colorful kind of, the color palette, but also the tone of voice. Whereas Killzone always was very gritty. We always wanted to make a world that, very dystopian. You want to get the hell out of it. We really wanted to make a game that you want to spend time in. That's beautiful. That's comfortable. So maybe that has to do with people, having kids in school, and it's nice to talk about it at the schoolyard. But there certainly was that hunger for something very positive and colorful and meaningful.
I was working on it from let's say 99, so it was quite some time. I think for the whole studio, everybody was sort of ready for something new, something fresh. Although I think we were quite afraid of it at the same time, but yeah, we definitely were all looking for something new. I think that's what we got.
When the studio was planning what their future identity was going to be, the games they were going to make in the next 5-10 years, they did so in a typically Dutch egalitarian manner by inviting the guerrillas to pitch their own ideas.
Back in 2010, so that was towards the end of the Killzone 3 development track, we put together a brief, very detailed, probably an 8-9 page brief discussing everything, from commercial rationales to Guerrilla's core competences. We had a lot of constraints and conditions that we wanted the pitches to adhere to. Everybody that worked at Guerrilla was invited to pitch.
We're a pretty flat company. Right. It's also very Dutch, not to be too hierarchy focused. So we see everybody as equality is a really important value also in Dutch society.
I believe we got almost 40 pitches back. Really interesting to me is that I believe there was only one straight shooter that came back. Right. I mean, there was gun gameplay in many of them, but in a straight, solid FPS, that was only one, maybe two of them.
And then that tells you something about the studio.
That tells you, and I think that illustrates that hunger, that craving for something new. I might have said no puzzle games, no racing games, because other people are way better at that than we are. So don't do that. But within that, everything was possible. We also went over Sony's portfolio at the time. Sony had no Western RPG in their exclusive portfolio, and you saw a lot of people actually taking that on board, because I think when you, as a development studio, the part of Worldwide Studios, you get that creative freedom. You have also at the same time a huge responsibility to contribute.
And so the whole studio got invited to do pitches. We got, I think, about 30, 40 quite a bunch. It took us weeks to review them all.
Right.
So everybody had to do a stand-up presentation of about 20-30 minutes in front of the group of directors and managers of the company.
The studio was awash with ideas. Some were full-blown game concepts, others were just ideas for mechanics. There were several role-playing games. Some were set on fantastical worlds, others in alternative pasts, some in the far-flung future. One of them had a robot companion. Guerrilla were a little cagey about telling us about these pitches. It's a creative well that they still pull from today. But they did tell us about the two most important ones. The first came from JB, the studio's art director. It was an open world game featuring a young girl. A girl who was fascinated with her world's lost past.
A lot of the elements were already there. It had the machines, it had a post-apocalyptic world that was completely overgrown, 1,000 years after the fall of mankind. Aloy was already there, the tribes was already there. What we didn't have yet basically was a completely cohesive story about what happened to the world. That was sort of cheating during the pitch because I said like it's a mystery. It was also by far the most risky one.
Right.
Because sort of even from a point of design philosophy and production, it's sort of like a 180 compared to what we did before.
It wasn't clear what the gameplay would be in that game, so that was hard for me to see. That I knew that was going to be a lot of work to figure that out. But it had such cool elements in it, like the machines and the far future, the sci-fi setting, sense of danger in it. There were so many nice things in there, and it being an open world action RPG, and that was also part of the pitch, that to me personally also had huge appeal.
The studio loved the pitch, but there was a snag. At around the time they were talking about Horizon, a similar looking game was announced just across the North Sea in England, a post-apocalyptic reimagining of the Ming Dynasty novel Journey to the West.
There must have been thousands of people living here.
More.
Tens of thousands?
Maybe.
At the same time, basically, Ninja Theory was working on a game called Enslaved.
Right.
And Enslaved basically featured a post-apocalyptic world, a female protagonist, machines that were slumbering that would be awakened. So I myself went to Herman and said, like, I don't think we should do this. It touches too much of these other points. And Herman basically sort of was very reluctant. He said, like, okay, well, I think it's a bad idea to do this, but we'll can it for now and maybe we'll look at it later. And so the company went to work on another project, which also people felt basically was a little bit more safe and secure. It was more in our line. It was a gritty sci-fi universe, but still very imaginative.
Guerrilla put Horizon to the side and started working on another game. In terms of gameplay, it was something a lot closer to the work they had done with Killzone, but less linear, more open, and totally different in terms of setting. A sort of alternate universe monster mashup with a striking visual style.
Yeah, that was Roy Postma's pitch. That was a game, very steampunky, that was his thing.
Yeah, it was like alternate history in the Industrial Revolution, and he would throw together all like the historical figures from the time. So you get like the Jekyll and Hydes and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit like, was it League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Oh yeah.
It's sort of that angle.
Gunplay in there, but if you look at the concept art that he produced for that, it was very reminiscent of the Order, and we weren't aware of that project at the time. Right. So when that was internally shown, that was, wait, I thought we were doing that or we were not doing that. How great that they were doing it.
The studio worked on the unannounced game for over 6 months, but when it came time to pitch it to Sony, they couldn't get Horizon out of their minds.
I think it was some point when we were already pitching the other one that I went to Herman and said, like, why exactly did we shelve Horizon? Because there were some market conditions, other games that came out, and I was like, we should try again. And Herman was actually on the same page. He was thinking the same thing around that time.
We actually went quite extreme with this idea of openness and getting and inviting people's opinions. Like many publishers do, Sony, Worldwide Studios gather after E3 when everybody is in LA. We had this meeting of about 150 devs and senior execs as well.
Right to the point, basically, where we were going to pitch it to Sony, Herman literally came at sort of like the 11th hour and said, like, get the other pitch as well, get Horizon, and we'll do it both at the same time. And we were so like, well, that's unfair, basically. Here's a highly polished pitch with lots of interesting animations and game mechanics that already work, and this is sort of like a really rough sketch.
I pitched both of them, and I literally just asked people, raise your hand, and it wasn't so much by vote, but I went to see the people that had very strong opinions, and what I really picked up on was the people that loved Horizon. They loved it with a passion. They really liked so many things about it, including the character, the story, that crazy world of that nature, and then the machines in it. So the quality of the likes that we got were really, really strong, and we built on that.
The Guerrillas decided to take the risk and follow their passion. Their next franchise would be set in the world of Horizon. But there were dozens of things that could go wrong. First, Guerrilla had never made an open world game before. They didn't have that expertise. Plus, this was coming out on a whole new generation of console. There were too many unknowables and too many things that could negatively impact the project. So Anji and the leadership team devised a plan to mitigate that risk. They'd work on 2 games. The first, a launch title for the PlayStation 4 in the Killzone franchise. This would help the team build the necessary tools and jump over many of the technical hurdles of working on a new platform.
When we were making Shadowfall, we already were making Horizon in parallel. So some of the things in Shadowfall were like test beds for Horizon as well. We're like stretching up our coordinate space because we knew we had to do an open world, so everything had to be wider and larger, and we're starting to do those experiments. So some of the code in Shadowfall actually dealt with like large open worlds, but like was not actually used. But into very late in the day, we couldn't really afford to have 2 different engines. So it's exactly the same engine. What we did at some point is like the code to run Horizon and Shadowfall was pretty much exactly the same code until the day that Shadowfall shipped. Like you just put different content there, like a different mod pack basically, and it became Horizon.
But while most of the studio was working on Shadowfall, a smaller team would focus on Horizon in what they called an ideation process. This is effectively a long, iterative brainstorming process where the team would try out new ideas, build prototypes, and iterate on the game in a small skunkworks project. Horizon could have ended up looking like a completely different game, but the decisions made during this ideation process would steer it towards the game.
How it works over here is that we don't have a sort of like single creative director that controls everything. A group of 3 people, game director, the art director, and the narrative director, that together sort of create the creative board. One of the things basically that we established quite early on is this design process, and it sounds a little bit pretentious, but it's called intrinsic ideation. It's quite a mouthful. But the whole idea is basically that within this sort of design philosophy, you can't just do something because it's cool. It's a way of avoiding what people call the rule of cool. Like if you have an idea and you just add another cool idea on top of it, another cool idea, that basically the idea must be cooler, but then you end up with, dinosaurs riding sharks with lasers. So the idea was really basically like everything has to come from things that we have already established as truth to the world.
So with Horizon, when we started, we created small experiences, small playable experiences, that allowed us to kind of create these moments, these encounters with machines through a bit of nature with a female character, and everything didn't look like it looks today when the game shipped, but at least you could see the potential and you could get a feel for it. And by playing this over and over and by adjusting things, you learn quite a lot. You learn about the density, you learn about the pacing, you learn about positioning, landscaping, many things you can learn from just playing your own prototypes, and that's an approach that I personally really like.
Rather than having a brainstorm at the start and then do implementation, it's a process where you implement and you analyze, you evaluate, you have some conclusions that you then brainstorm about, and then you implement those again, you evaluate, you have some conclusions, and you go through this cycle. And with those cycle, you try to bring something to a better standard. And to give you an example, the robots, the machines, So we started designing those with a bit of a Killzone mindset. In Killzone we always had some like flying, more like war machines. If you look back at the designs, they have this sort of military style, and we played around with the idea that they could be sort of like these maybe broken war machines. I think the bigger problem with it was that it didn't work from an emotional perspective, like the emotional core was just completely off.
We came from Killzone. Basically all our designs for military industrial machines. And that's sort of also the first avenue that we took. And we built a whole bunch of these things, sort of like alien, creepy machines, quite inhuman, quite monster-esque, grotesque even to certain points. And then we put it in game and it didn't really work. The whole idea is basically that you felt like a hunter, and the moment basically that you put a player against something that looks like, you know, a tank from Terminator, you start feeling more like a soldier in a war.
And what the team did then is they went back to a period in time where humans were not the dominant life form, the Stone Ages. And then, I don't remember who, but somebody suggested like, yeah, maybe we should make like a dinosaur machine. And then lots of people got really worried. They were like, robot dinosaurs, you know, are you crazy?
Absurd.
That's never gonna work. But at the same time, we were sort of stuck, and I think this is great when you have an ideation. You can try things out, right? It's all about keeping it moving. Then you see the very early concept art that was created. That already shows you like, hey, you know, this kind of works. We had some really rough models in 3D, and yeah, it kept working. So even though you could say that intellectually it didn't make any sense, right. Like from an intellectual perspective, it doesn't make any sense. But emotionally, this completely started to click.
Set the concept art team to paint out basically what this could look like, and then suddenly basically we got these pictures of, you know, sort of primitive man basically hunting large robot brachiosaurs, and basically everybody's looking like it. It's like, this looks awesome. Like, you know, I know it's silly, but I want to play this. So like, well, I guess we're making a robot dinosaur hunting game. You felt much more like a hunter because you could study them and read them and get a mental picture of this thing, instead of if it was really alien and strange, it would be really hard to develop that image.
Players of games see everything in reverse. We see the final product and then we dive backwards. Yeah. But it's obviously like you've got this wide cone and you're trying to get everyone basically to the same like creative point. Yeah. Is that a struggle? Like trying to make your art department and grab
absolutely,
everyone? Yeah.
Absolutely. And the way I always see that is that you're kind of like in a sort of a sinus wave. You're going left and right in this cone, but you're trying to slowly go to that end point where everything comes together. But it's, on one hand, it's good that you go left and right and go quite wide, that you explore different options. So in the beginning, I think that's, it's only for the better to explore lots of options and ideas and just to see if something works and sticks or not. But at some point you have to narrow down and cut the things that really don't fit.
Over the course of this process, the design team was beginning to find its form. The team started to understand how large the world needed to be. It turns out 50 times smaller than what they had originally envisaged. They wanted a denser world, packed with flora and fauna, but this had its own consequences. You may have already noticed the second player in this footage we showed earlier. Yes, Horizon was originally going to have co-op, but to do this, they'd have to drop the level of detail in the game by half. Through ideation, they knew that that wasn't the game they were trying to make. As the project picked up speed, the team realized that they were lacking in two departments, two areas that they had never had to dedicate much time to in the past: narrative and quest design. It's fair to say that narrative took a backseat to gameplay in Guerrilla's earlier work. The stories in Killzone were done by contractors, so they never had an internal writing team. On top of that, linear first-person shooters don't really require a quest department. So to fill in the gaps, Guerrilla would target two key hires: a narrative director and a quest director.
So there are really two things. One is we acknowledge that there's a lot in Horizon that truly builds in our core competence, and what we're good at that needed to be shown in Horizon. So the combat, we're making an open world action RPG, we wanted to make sure that the core combat was better than the competition. That was a goal, because that's what we knew how to do. And then there were elements that we had zero to hardly any experience with. Quest design, storytelling in an open world setting. So that was a recruitment process. We went after some hand-picked key hires on the writing team, on the quest design team. But also we understood that we required a real overhaul of the technology to be able to make that. So the tool chain that you need to build these quests, to facilitate great looking graphics in an open world to the expectations that people have of a Guerrilla title that typically was more linear and therefore easier to build. So we had very well-defined project goals, and then we went after the right people to supplement the talent that we already had.
I joined the studio about 4 years ago. I was brought on board specifically for this project. Guerrilla reached out to me because of my background in open world role-playing game development. And when they did that, they kind of showed me the pitch for the project. And I was pretty stunned. I mean, first of all, I was kind of flabbergasted to see that a studio that had been working on linear first-person shooters had decided to create this huge open-world action role-playing game.
And you're no stranger to post-apocalyptic open-world role-playing games.
Right. Yeah. So I was lead writer on Fallout New Vegas, but this world, of course, was something completely different. Whereas the entire Fallout series is the post-apocalypse is this kind of junk heap that's left behind as a result of all this human savagery. This was something that was striking these notes of grace and beauty and majesty, what we often called post-apocalyptic nature, that took a lot of inspiration from BBC. BBC documentaries. With some of the early footage that they were showing me from prototypes, you could immediately imagine David Attenborough just starting to narrate what was on screen. And so it felt like it was something that was very distinctive, unlike anything I'd worked on before.
When John came on board, the story and the game were quite different. The story still revolved around Aloy. It had the world, the idea of the machines, her as a hunter, but it centered around a towering city in the center of the game's world. Back then it was known as Mesa City. It still exists in Horizon Zero Dawn, but at around a quarter of the size, and you don't reach it until much later in the game. Maybe remember it. It's the game's largest city, Meridian. But of course it wasn't just large things that were cut by the writing team. Lots of smaller things did too, including horses.
I remember when John came in, he did a complete overhaul of the story, and I'm very happy he did. And one of the things that he needed for the story was that the world did not have large animals anymore.
Right.
So for the first couple of years, we have all the prototypes. You see Aloy riding on a horse. And then sort of John comes in, overhauls the story and says, all horses are out. So naturally, the other creatives who were like, what do you say? Like, they were completely used to Aloy riding on a horse. It's ridiculous, she has a horse. Like, look at all the cool stuff. Look at it, like all the prototypes that we have. And John said, no, this is really important. Like, I want Aloy to be special in this world, so she gets the focus device and she can hack machines, so therefore she's the only person. If she can ride a horse, everybody can ride a horse in this world, right? So looking back at it, it made a huge amount of sense what John was saying, but it was not necessarily clear when that point was brought to the table, and of course there was lots of resistance.
Yeah, he made immediately such a big impact on just taking inventory of what we already came up with. A lot of it he threw out of the window, and he basically wrote a new story. And we went through a number of iterations on that story as well to really fine-tune it. And I think that took about half a year to get the story from when he joined to when we thought, okay, this story, we like this story, this is what we're going to make.
I think it's actually that what's so different about it is that in the case of something like a Fallout game, you're essentially stepping into a player-shaped hole. You get to create any kind of character that you want to be. This was actually one of the huge challenges on Fallout New Vegas. We literally had to account for the possibility that the player was a sociopathic walking flamethrower who would immediately murder anyone that they encountered, or someone who was like Mahatma Gandhi in the wasteland, you know, someone who literally would not even harm a cazador, right? And both of those playthroughs had to be possible. But the relationship that you have to the world when you're playing that type of game is very different, right? I mean, you're sort of, figuring out what are all the different levers of power and what you want to do with the various factions, and you're uncovering a lot of lore that can be really cool, but is basically impersonal to you. It's about the world. The world itself poses kind of a big mystery, but it's not your story as the player necessarily. Whereas in this game, everything about the ancient world, especially everything that you're going to find on the main quest, that's directly relevant to Aloy's own story. She's, trying to solve the riddle of her birth. We were trying to create a hybrid between what's most exciting about playing a massive open world role-playing game in terms of the scope of the world and also the depth of the lore and a lot of the pleasures of interactive dialogue and of some choice, but we were really trying to blend that with what's most exciting and cool about an action adventure that has an authored character, that has a defined arc, and the cinematic storytelling that's used to convey that.
Story in video games is action, and so for a story to work, you need actions that help the player feel connected to it. John was hired to write the story, develop the lore, and create the characters, but the actions those characters would take was the work of another department, quest design. This is where Guerrilla targeted another key hire, another American too, David Ford, who, like John, has quite the resume.
I originally started working on EverQuest for Sony Online Entertainment. I did that for
isolated from one another, but on Horizon, the team would require complex tools that would allow designers to develop quests with waypoints, dialogues, wind conditions, spawn triggers, effects, and so much more, all in a world that was constantly being iterated on by the level and world design teams.
I interviewed in August, and I was actually invited to come out for a couple of days in September, so I officially started in early October, but I came out for a short visit to meet with most of the engineering team, with Mikhail, the tech director, and a bunch of his leads, where I kind of laid out my vision for how quest tools would work. I'd seen a bunch of different ways of doing tools in other games, ways things had gone poorly, common locations for bugs or common missteps that I had seen up to that point. So we talked about how we could kind of encapsulate the scripting in layers that it made sense for it to be in, and make sure that you're not duplicating a lot of scripting in multiple places, and just making it easier to untie and untangle what you're creating. But when I got here, the tools were, they were all focused around making Killzone levels.
Everybody knew that that streaming would be a big one, memory management, because like something like Killzone, splice it into like 100 different shards, and everybody plays the same game from A to B, basically, and maybe there's a couple of paths and twists and you can take a turn, but that's about it. So it's very predictable. You can test to see like, does this part of the game fit in memory, and does it load in time if you load the next part, and there's like, you can put it into an Excel table, and something like Horizon is like you can go in any direction and just leave half a quest behind with all those people with their plans and purpose, because you just like engage with them. And we had no clue like, what sort of effect that would have on memory.
The tools originally were pretty good for creating bespoke things, but not for this this broader implementation that we needed. It was about a year and a half into development that the tools that we have now really started to come online.
Yeah, that's actually something that came from JB, our art director. He was very clear from the start, like, we have to do a lot of stuff with procedural placement because we cannot populate a very rich world or like do the sort of like artistic strokes of like on it and iterate. We can't iterate on a world that big anymore. So he was very adamant, as art directors can be, on a procedural approach, and we made a placement system where the artists define rule sets and that then place like meshes and stuff that they make, but also sounds and entities. So they can, for example, say like, okay, if there is, if the distance to the nearest river is within like 8 meters, and the height is lower than 200 meters or something, we spawn randomly these entities, and you have like fireflies or something, like buzzing bees around creeks. And they say like, when the distance to a river is 0 meters, so basically you're in the river, and the current depth is more than 2 meters, we spawn like all those stuff that you find in rivers, all those plants and everything. So like they're all like automatically get that stuff inside.
So this is our world data map. Let's just zoom into where we are. So we have a topo water. This tells us where the rivers are.
Right.
We have one for roads. And as you can see, these they're not just black and white maps, they have a fall off on them. So I can tell it that the value here for example, in the river, the white part is where the water is.
Okay.
And at 50% grey, that's the edge of the water.
Right.
And as it fades out, we can say, okay, this plant is next to the river, so we're going to use a different tree here because it knows that that area is next to the river.
So that's all procedurally generated because it's nature, and there's no point in hand placing those things. It doesn't add much because that's just the way it works. But of course, like, we don't procedurally generate anything man-made. So all the villages and settlements and everything, that's all just like.
What about creature placement?
That's all hand placed.
Hand placed as well, including animals?
No, the wildlife is procedurally made, but it is again context dependent. So you'll find different types of, depending on the type of forest or the elevation or stuff, you'll find different types of wildlife. We decided like that of course we were going to make an open world engine, and everything was going to be like different streaming system and stuff, and then they decided to put like things the size of entire Killzone levels underneath the ground. That took a long time to get right. I mean, in retrospect it's funny because it's a good stress test for your engine, but yeah, you have all the set of problems that we had in the first person game we also had, but then in our open world game underneath the ground, and it had to seamlessly stream. And they also made these ridiculous things where you have like a cauldron underneath the ground, and then right on top of it there's like the hunters gathering or something, and then and we it was really easy for the cauldron to be streamed in. So you were standing there, like, talking with a campfire, and a scene starts, and then somebody disables some streaming triggers because you're in a small conversation, and all of a sudden you see everybody's face going to like 5 triangles and all the texture disappearing, and you're like, what the hell's happening? It's like, yeah, it's starting to stream in a bunker that you happen to be standing right on top of.
Streaming the world was critical to ensuring the game had no loading screens and so didn't lose any of its immersive qualities. But another important aspect of memory management is drawing, what the engine spends time rendering for the player. Earlier this year, a Dutch documentary on the studio showed off esse frustum culling, much to the wonder of the game-playing public. I asked Michiel to give us some insight into how that system works.
Yeah, first of all, like the whole frustum culling thing, it was really funny to see that explode, because I think it was a really good visualization of something that is like super normal in the graphics industry. I mean, of course you don't draw stuff that's out of screen. This was not even about streaming, this was about drawing. You basically, of course, you have a person somewhere in the world. If you're third person, you have a camera that's somewhere above probably, looking into the world, which is defined by something that ends up being square. So there's a point in space from which a sort of like square thing called a frustum emits, and everything that's outside of the frustum you don't have to draw. And then even the stuff that's inside the frustum, what you try to do is like draw the things that are quite close to you first, and then the stuff that's behind it, because you don't want to like draw a mountain and a bunch of trees on it, and then 5 characters in front of it, and then draw a house like 1 centimeter in front of you, because you're wasting all the time first drawing a beautiful mountain while you're drawing like a door in front of it. So you try to first draw the door, and then when you send the mountain to the GPU, it goes like, all those pixels are behind the door, like toss it out. It happened to be in a documentary, and people saw that, and then people were like, all of a sudden they got it, like, that's what's really happening. Like, yeah, when that bunny hops off screen, immediately it's not gone, but of course we're not rendering it anymore.
The tools the team built were critical to the success of Horizon, but they worked so well that another team has now started using them, a team working on one of the most anticipated games in recent memory.
When Kojima-san was around, we did a bold move, and I think JB, our art director, and myself made like a 340-page PowerPoint presentation with all the cool stuff that our engine did, and then at the end of it we offered them a wooden box with a memory stick in it, and said like, here, have our engine source code. They went through a very deep investigation that I've later seen the results of, big Excel sheet, like hundreds and hundreds of lines of like investigation. It's like one of the most thorough and like battle-hardened teams you've ever seen. And in the end, they were looking very specifically, I can't say too much, but like they knew which game they want to make. Hideo Kojima has a really good idea about what he wants. They were looking for something for the perfect fit, and one of the things that's really important to them is like making sure they get the best out of the platform to give the best experience for the people playing the game. They're really adamant. They want to make sure that they will do anything to make sure that the game is the best thing they can do on the platform that they're releasing it on. So they were really impressed by the performance figures, by also the tool set around it. And we've been working with them ever since. So, I mean, of course, they're taking it in a slightly different direction. They have a different game, different focus on different aspects of the tools. A lot of stuff, they have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, and they come up with questions and suggestions, and they help us design better versions of our tools as well. I mean, it definitely works both ways.
It's actually really great to be able to help Hideo on Death Stranding. That is such an amazing team. They are so experienced and they're so talented. So it kind of was almost obvious that, hey, why don't we just offer what we have? How could that possibly hurt us? And we'll help them out with that. And they have been super grateful. They've been bouncing some really good feedback. So it's actually evolved into a collaboration. It's really great as a developer, just for the sake of making games, if you can help a great team like that.
Yeah, I joked with our tech director, Michiel. It's like,
doing crazy dreaming.
that started this whole project off: the machines. The more military-style machines the team had originally envisaged are still in the game. They became part of the story as old-world weapons of war. But the animalistic machines we now know and love went through a dramatic evolution of their very own.
So the first machine that we ever finished was the Thunderjaw. Everybody was sort of like, is this a good idea? This is the most complex one. And then as our designer says, like, that's why we need to do it. Because basically, if we can make this one work, we can make the whole game work.
And we started with that because it was, like you said, the most complex. Yeah. So we wanted to try out all the different things you could do with the machines, like taking the weapons off or slowing them down if you shoot at a certain part, or freezing them or stuff like that. So we had all the kind of like basic mechanical capabilities of the machine already present on that. But after that first initial design, it even became more complex, because in that first simplistic one was just blocks. You couldn't shoot, for example, armor plates off. So there was an additional layer that we wanted, so that made it even more complex and more things.
I think Bakey had something like 27 different weak points that all had different functionalities. So you would shoot this particular part and Bakey the robot needed to act in a different way, that particular part and it needed to act in a certain way, and everything also needed to stay visually readable. A large point of our feedback is like, you know, sure you can add more and more different colors to these things, but ultimately a Christmas tree isn't really readable.
I think originally, like, every resource canister had to be a unique resource. There was these kind of things like, yeah, but I cannot make that understandable or readable. So, you know, we brought it down to like three or four. But we probably started out with like 12 different unique resources that you could shoot off the machines. So it's like,
At some point with the combat, we had so many hidden meters inside the machines. And all the different machines had different meters, and they had stamina, and they had, I don't know what, they got tired from running at some point, and there were so many systems at play that we didn't know ourselves exactly how to fight these machines. Right. So that was kind of a moment where we said, okay, let's dial it back and let's look at the bigger things. What is the most interesting and what is simpler for players to understand and what is fun to do? And that is shooting things off machines, like shooting the plates and taking away armor. That's something players can intuitively understand, and it's nice to break things. That's always nice feedback when you shoot something and something breaks off. So then we thought, okay, we have these, let's put a bigger emphasis on the components. Let's do more with those.
Which is also the reason why we basically picked the Thunderjaw as sort of like the prototype robot, just because we knew if we could hit all the things that would be fun on the robots on this one particular robot, we could just break it down into smaller pieces and integrate those on the smaller type of robots like the watches and stuff like that. So that was more the exercise. Okay, what is like the total package, and then sort of like break it down into the smaller sections to the other robot.
But it took us 18 months to develop it. At EV in 2015, when we announced it, this was also pretty much basically the only fully functional machine that we had. And even then, basically, it required a lot of scripting to keep this thing working. But sort of like it was this race towards, okay, we're going to show the world basically that we have a game where you can hunt robot dinosaurs. So make sure this works, and it works really well.
We go! Oh, someone's angry! Gotta get under it. Got it!
All the design documentation for the robots were like 50 or 60 pages per robot. Wow. Before we eventually started making them. Because everything had to be thought out first. Describing everything from the attack ranges to what they would do idle and stealth and group behavior, all the weak points, where the armor would be, all those kind of things, hit reactions, everything was defined.
For example, with the Ravager, right? The Ravager was, I think, actually the one that we started with like a full new production on after we did all the prototyping. And then looking at it from a game design point of view and also from a visual point of view, that thing was just a predator, just like hunting its prey, right? So that's the one thing that I really wanted to emphasize in animation. And that's where also like as soon as we started to look for reference for like panthers, hyenas, etc. that are chasing their prey, there's all like, especially a cheetah, for example, like they have such high speed that as soon as they sort of like try to change direction, there's all this sort of like out of control motion on their legs, try to keeping up with the speed, and that's something that I really wanted to emphasize on the motion on those things.
To build a machine based on an animal with muscles again, you get all these nice like organic lines. You know, you get all these nice power lines and power curves and all these kind of things in it. And then we started building like the framework over it. And I started, instead of like doing the hexagonal, you know, machine stuff, we started like following the lines, and everything became nice and organic. And on top of that, you put like the plating, and of course they follow these lines as well. And then you put on the detailing. So instead of like this sort of super angular, hard surface kind of machine, you know, from the inside out, we actually build out this new machine that has all these, you know, retained all these nice curves and became really, yeah, organic and actually became alive.
One of the strongest aspects of the machine's design is their sound design. The machines in Horizon sound terrifically unique while giving the player critical audio cues for them to react to. As I discovered, much like the design and animations of these machines, a lot of the inspiration for the sounds came from animals.
That's something that we wanted, like for the attacks, have a very specific audio cue, so that even off screen you would know an attack would be coming, next to the visual kind of things that we do. And we wanted to have that character that we were describing also kind of represented in the audio. I think she also used like a chihuahua for the scout in one of its attacks, to have that kind of like jittery dog kind of feeling, like the rah 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 when he comes at you.
Okay, so the long legs I think had the chicken sound, but also, I don't want to say this, but yeah, I'll say it, whatever. It was a lot so me actually.
All right.
Yeah. And
mimicking a chicken?
Yeah. People will hear it after this. I'm ruining it. I hate this. So actually, when I got robot designs, there wasn't any instructions as to they're going to have a vocalization. The term vocalization came purely from actually my idea that I need them to create a character. My goal was to have, especially for the machine types that are sort of in a group structure or in a herd, and if they're clearly exhibiting animalistic behaviors, I thought, okay, they would talk to each other, I guess. You can just observe them and have this chitter going on. But they had to be balanced against the cues that you really needed to communicate. Say when they see you first time, or when they get alerted to something, or when they're in between in a combat situation, occasionally they taunt you. And all these animations that actually are there, they're there to create their, sort of communicate their character, but also a function. So to create this sort of iconic, relatively easy to recognize kind of sound, but still keep them attached to the size or the character of the robot.
Our goal was that by not looking at the enemy, you could tell what it was doing and where it was, by hearing. So you would hear if it was searching, if it found something, if it was going into combat, if it was about to attack. So all of these stages, all of these behaviors that are important for the player, we wanted the player to only, by audio, to be able to know what was going on. So that helps if, once we got that sort of working, that helped enormously with some of these enemies that might not be in your view. You could still hear what they're doing. And I think players, maybe not consciously, but I think they at some point will learn with specific sounds of machines what's going on, and if they need to run or dodge or do something else. Yeah.
Over the course of years, these machines evolved from concept drawings to prototypes to the machines we see today. They were iterated on, given new looks, personalities, new combat rules, audio cues, and so much more. They look and feel like real, believable, animalistic machines. And so perhaps the biggest testament to the quality of work that was done to animalize these robots was how that work impacted the wildlife in this game.
Is there any AI or anything that's shared, or animations that's shared between the machines and the fauna, like just the animals?
Yes, we did reuse some animations for the fox, I think.
I think basically all the like the wildlife, as we call it in game, is basically a variant on one of the like machine animation that we did. It was like one of the time constraint things, but in the end it actually worked out just because they're so animalistic. It basically actually transferred over to them really quick. And as soon as we had that, we just polished them up a little bit, of course. But a lot of sort of like the base animation for those wildlife things become from the machines. Yeah.
They evolved into real creatures.
Yes, exactly. Right.
The game was chopped at and added to for years. It didn't originally have human-on-human combat, but through playtesting, they realized they needed some for variety and to help show the various types of tribal cultures. The tall necks, known internally as com-giraffes, were originally huntable. You may remember them walking in herds in the original E3 2015 reveal. But some of the team didn't think murdering these elegant, non-aggressive creatures worked with Aloy's character. There was years of work done to create believable tribes with distinct beliefs, superstitions, and cultures. We're going to publish extended interviews containing a lot more of this deep, spoiler-rich insight at a later date. As the project barreled towards their 2017 release window, so much more had to be completed. A game at this scale requires so many elements working well and well together. The team all agreed that had it not been for these final months, Horizon Zero Dawn may not have come together at all.
I think we were fortunate to have this much time, mostly. Figuring out kind of lots of important things like Aloy, who is Aloy, what is her personality, what is her story, how old is she, what does she look like, all this stuff just took a lot of time to figure out. But also, yeah, the same thing is for the combat. The unique component of this concept was, of course, these machines in terms of gameplay, but we didn't know how you would fight with these. Looking at Horizon might feel like we already knew exactly that combat would be like this, because that's what it is, but that wasn't a straightforward thing that we just ended up there. It was a lot of experimentation and cutting and adding and changing and simplifying in a lot of cases as well. A year and a half before we shipped is when we first saw, okay, this combat is going to be pretty cool.
We were immensely fortunate to find Ashley Birch to play Aloy. We actually had, we heard a lot of auditions. We even had, for some of the prototypes we did, we had sort of placeholder dialogue that was put in place by other actors. And none of that ever felt right. And the moment that we heard Ashley performing Aloy, is like, oh, there's Aloy. It was that feeling of discovery.
I think I'm most proud on how everybody worked together on it. Like if the beautiful nature, we got a lot of praise from our beautiful nature. It's really so many different teams who had to collaborate on making that work. I mean, there's the huge, let's say, performance side of things to get it to stream and to run on performance, and the procedural content generation aspect of it, up till the sound team, who, believe it or not, every ecotope, as we call them, have different bird sounds, because they actually went to do the research and have that all work together. It's really hard to explain, but if you look at the game 3 months before it was done, it was nowhere near the end result. And then even when you think, 7 years, that's such a long time, how can 3 months more or less, does it really make the difference? But it does, it totally does.
The technology enables, so you can do a lot more, you can show a lot more detail in everything, in your assets, in your animations, but also the consumers, they expect a lot more scope, gameplay duration. I'm actually really proud of the fact that we have been able to create a character that people embrace and want to follow, and I've gotten a lot of mail and from people who have daughters that they go training like Aloy did with Rost, and they go practice, and we're literally talking people with daughters that are 3-4 years old, and they're on the couch and they're practicing and they're doing dodge rolls and they're buying bow and arrow. It seems that Aloy to many people was an important character, and I don't think we've had a lead character before that really inspired so many people, including young girls. That's just really wonderful that we have been able to create that.
Do you have kids yourself?
I have a 13-year-old son.
Oh, lovely.
And he was not allowed to play the Frozen Wilds yesterday, and he had not wanted to come into the studio to play it because he wanted to play in one go, but he finishes his test today, and I think starting 3 today he will be well into the Frozen Wilds.
Do you make your 13-year-old son sign NDAs?
I'll let Mr. PR here answer that one.
It's the same thing I think happened with Killzone 2. Also, what we achieved there, it took a while before that actually sunk in, and before I realized what we built and how much people were liking it. But it's incredibly motivating, of course, to see this response, and gives a lot of energy to start on a new adventure.
Are you sick of making open world games, or?
Oh no. No.
These will keep. I can't spare the wait.